And the values that I want to insert is with the placeholder ID, with the placeholder name, and with the placeholder last name. These placeholders will contain a value. You must do this in order to secure the database and to prevent SQL injections. In the next line, I will say that the statement is going to bind values, value, and the value that I want to bind is the ID, that's the placeholder, that's text for now, and I want to bind it with the SID that I created for the user. I have to duplicate these lines two more times. Now I want to bind the name, and the name will be binded with a variable called sname, and the last name, that's the binding with the variable lastname. Once I have binded the values, I will actually execute the query. And obviously I need to send something back to the client, so I will echo, and I will echo. Actually, the client will need to know about this newly created ID, because when I click here add user, I have the name, I have the last name, but I do not have the ID of this user. So if later on I want to delete it by clicking on the delete button that will be here, I will need the user's ID. I think it's a very good idea that we pass the ID of the user, and this ID will be the ID that I created in the SID. So what I do is I will just concatenate this ID. I save it. The way that you can test this, it's via Postman. So I go to Postman, and over here I will pass the name, I will pass the last name, and then I will click send. I get ID out, I pass A and B, so now I can go to the queries file that I had. Let me open it, queries, and in here I can actually run a command. I can say select all from users. I will do Control-Shift-Q. You can just do a run query here as well by right clicking on it. And I get ID with the name with the last name. If I add a new last name, let's do C and D for the name and last name. I will send, I will get a new ID, and when I look at my command, Control-Shift-Q, I get C and D. So my database is fully working, my API is fully working. Now I need to connect the API to the front end. I will save these queries and then I will close it. Let me move the API right there. So that's the last thing that the server knows about. Since this is working fine, I go to the front end and I know that I have to fetch. I'm going to connect to this backend. So that is inside the company. Well, that I already have. Actually, it's called API create user, API create user.php. That's the first argument of the fetch function. The second argument is actually a JSON object that allows me to pass several key value pairs with properties. The method, which is really important, is going to be a post. And I also need to pass the data. And the data is going to be passed in the body of the post request. And what I want to pass is actually this form. This form doesn't have an ID. Let me give it an ID. ID frm add user. I save it. I go to the JS code, and the body that I will pass, I want to grab the whole form, and I want to pass whatever elements are with the name variable in it. I will say that this will be a new form data, and this new form data will actually grab the form. So I will do I don't know if I do a document query selector or document.getElementById. Let's do that. Document.getElementById, and I want to get the form that I just call form add user, which should be that one. I copy and paste it. This async function expects to get something after some time, so the fetch is actually a wait. And once I have fetched the data inside the sData, I'm going to say that JData equals, and I will convert sData, because what I'm getting out of this fetch call is text. You can see that I get this as text or that as text, and I need to convert that text into a JSON object, and that takes some time. Let's do a wait, and then I will say sData.json. Close that. Once I have the JData, I will do a console.log, and then I will log JData. I want to see if that's fully working. I save. I reload the page. I will do a hard reload just in case. I will do the name A, the last name B, hit add user. I get ID back. Since that seems to be working fine, I will do AAA and BB, hit enter. I get an ID back. I will actually open the query file that I have here, and then I will run this query. I hope to see the AAA and the BB. That's correct. So I have added the user successfully to the database. Now I need to add these values to the front end. Every time I click on add user, those values should show here. I close this file. So over here, I need to display the user somewhere in the page once I get this command back, and I will do it here. I'm going to create a div. This div will have a unique ID for all the users, and each individual user will show here. So we just hardcode this for now. I have this as my blueprint. This will be the individual user, so I give it a class. This user will be displayed in a div here and a div there for now, because I am not going to edit the data. If I were to edit the data, I will display it in maybe input boxes, and then we have a button here. Let's do that. For now, let's just do a div, and this div will be for the name. I will hardcode the name A. The second div will be for the last name, and the third name will be for the delete. So that will pop up here. This delete, I don't like it. I'm going to go to Emojipedia, and let's see what I can find instead of that delete. Let me find a trash can. Waste basket, that's how they call it. Okay, I copy the waste basket, and then I will place it instead of the delete. Save and reload, so I get this out. Now that's for the individual user. So this user should be styled so it looks A, B, and then the basket here. I will do that. I'm going to say that the class user is going to be styled. It's going to be gridded there, and the grid column template, grid template columns will have one fraction, and one fraction. Save and reload. That's looking fine. They are touching actually the top, so I will give to the user a margin top, and the margin top will do 10 pixels. I guess that will be enough. Yeah, that seems fine. All right, so now that I have created this, that's my blueprint. How about if we put the trash can right in the center underneath the add users? Let's do that. Class user, get the last child. I know that's the last child because that was the last div I created. And let's say that the text align is center. Let's see if that works. Sure, great. It's running fine. So now that I click here C and D, for example, I should be able to regenerate the same div user with that data, and right now it's not going to do anything. So I will do that. I will go here and keep in mind two things. When I click on the add user, this will show, and when I reload the page, I should have all my users displayed here as well. So the layout for this user is when I click here, or when I reload the page, they will pop up there. And that means that I can reuse that as a variable to generate this layout. So this will be my blueprint. I will copy it, and then I will create a const variable. Let me call it s user div blueprint. That's a very long name, but it actually will do the job because you know that's a blueprint. And I will backtick it now. That's a template literal, and then I will paste inside this template literal or string template. I will just indent it as good as possible so we know that that's the blueprint for the user div. This cannot be the letter A, it cannot be the letter B, this will always be the same, but this could be a different name. It could be G, it could be P. Therefore, I will just create my own templating engine, really primitive by the way, and then I will say that over here I will have the name, and over here we'll have the last name. That means that whenever I call this will pop up in the screen if I inserted, prepended, or appended. Once I have received the data, by the way, this user should also have an ID. So I will give it an ID. The ID will be the ID that I get via the API, and then I just template it with this ID. Some people call this mustache or handlebars. It's the same thing I'm doing here. Over here, when I get the data back, I'm going to do this. Instead of logging, I'm going to insert the blueprint inside the users div. So I will go here, and then I will say document. And now instead of doing get element by ID, I will do the query selector. Query selector, I'm going to select the ID users. I will select by ID users. And what I want to do is actually, I want to put this div inside the users. So we'll do an insert adjacent element or adjacent HTML, however that's pronounced. This is just saying that I want to put something in it. It takes two arguments, two properties. Do I put it after the beginning of these users? Yes, right after. And what I want to put in there is whatever I have in this variable, in the variable blueprint. Save it. I will just hardcode AA. I don't see anything here, so I must have a mistake somewhere because it's not popping up. I save, I will do a hard reload, and then I have my name and my last name. Again, name and last name and so on. This name should be the name that I put in the text box. The last name should be the last name from the text box. And the ID that you will see here. Let me just increase this for a second. This ID should not be user here. This ID should not be the ID. It should actually be the ID from the server, the one that I received from the server. So I will just go back to the console, clear the whole thing, and start changing the blueprint. As soon as I get data back, I will make a copy of the blueprint. I will actually say let s div for the user is going to be the copy of the blueprint. And then I will start changing the ID, the name, and the last name on the copy, never on the original blueprint. So we'll say that the div user equals, and then I will sdiv user I will replace, takes two arguments. The first one is what I want to replace. I would like to replace my own invented mustache ID, and I want to replace it with ID that I have inside the variable called JData. And you can see when I click add user, you were seeing here before the ID. So I will say jdata.id. I save it. I also need to replace the name and the last name. Therefore, I duplicate these lines. I will replace the name and I will replace the last name. Now, the name actually doesn't come from the API. The name is already in this text box here and there. So the name is already here. So now I want to fetch the name from this text box. So that's what I need to try to get out of it. So what I will do is I will say, well, I have the ID and then I have this attribute that is unique to the name. So what I will do is I will say that I want to extract document query selector. I want to point to the form that's called form at user, and I want to actually, I will have to sum out this a little bit. You can see this. That's the second argument for the function. And I actually want to point to the attribute called name, and the name of it is the txt name. All this will point to the form with the unique input box called txt name, and I want the value of it. I want to extract the value of that. I will have to do the exact same thing for the second element, the last name. I will break this into lines so you can better see it. And then I will say I want to point to the form. I want to point to the attribute called name. This time I will have to point to the txt last name. I want the value of it. I will do that here. Break it into lines. And I will try it. But remember, now I need the last name, because this last name is actually the attribute called txt last name. I save it. I reload the page. Let's do a test. Let's do a C and a D. I don't see anything here. It should have worked, but I am actually inserting the blueprint, and I should have inserted the Steve user. I save it again, reload, C, D, add the user CD. I will add the user now YYY with OOO, add the user. The ID should be a really weird ID. I can see some IDs here. Let me check it. That's the ID. It starts with an E3 and it ends with a 4C. I will open here my queries. I will run the query and I will try to see if this ID matches that ID, E3, and it ends with 64C, 64C YYOO. So everything's working as expected. I have been able to talk to the backend, actually add the user to the backend. The last thing we're going to do here is we are going to be able to populate all these with all the users that we have previously saved. Please guys, subscribe, like the video, and get notifications, because that helps me a lot. So now we'll do that, the recreation of these elements, and that should happen. I could do it with PHP, definitely yes. So we'll populate this server side, but I want to do this via an API, so you understand APIs a little bit more. If I want to show the users here, I will have to create an API. This was called create user, and I guess I will call this new API get users, because I want to get all the users. So I go here and then I create an API, call it getUsers.php. Don't waste time. The API getUsers needs the same connection to the database and the same attributes for the database. So we just move it next to the createUser. There, take the createUser, copy it, select all of it, Control-A, Control-C, and just paste it in the API getUsers. This API getUsers is not going to generate an ID, doesn't expect anything from post. It is going to connect to the database. It is going to try to get exceptions out of the database. It is going to fetch associative. It wants to get this out, an array with JSON objects. Each of these objects is a row inside the users table. I don't want to bind the values because I don't need ID, I don't need the name, I don't need the last name. And I am not going to echo this because what I want to echo is the whole array with JSON users. And this command will change. The command will say select all from users. It is the exact same command as that one. So when I run this from VS Code, I get this out. When I run it from PHP, all of it will be the array and each row will be the JSON object. Let's go here, I execute the command and then I will echo actually the statement that will fetch all. This fetch all will give me all the data. But since this is going to be an object, it's going to be an array with JSON objects internally, I have to convert it into text so I can pass it to the front end. I save it and now I need to test it. So what I will do is I will go to Postman and instead of pointing to the create user API, I will call the get users API. I send it and this is what I get out. You can see that's the array and each row is a JSON object, and over here I close the array. The API is working exactly as expected, so I don't need to touch it anymore. I can close this API, I can close that API. I don't need the CSS because the style is fine for now. I close it. I don't need the queries. I close it. What I need is actually, I need to create a function that will load the users as soon as I load the page. So I will build a function. I will call it, let me give some spaces here. I'm going to create a little spacer for the functions. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. And then I will build the function. I will call it actually get users. This function will run as soon as I load the page, so I will just call it from here. I could do a self-invoking function, but no need to do that. Get users, I will just do a console.log, the letter X, just to see when I upload the page, reload the page, I see the letter X in there. So that's exactly what I needed. Call the function get users. Since this is going to be an API, we will connect to an API. It's going to be an async function. And what I will do is I will point to the API called API get users. So the first argument of the fetch will be that one. I will say that fetch will give me some data back. It will be a string. Fetch is an async function, so I will await. And then I will call fetch. I am going to point to the API get users.php. Once I got the data in here, I'm going to say that JData, because I need to get the data as an object, as an array. Actually, we call it AJData, so you know that's an array with JSON objects which contain data. And that will be, I will again await the conversion of the data into JSON. So this will actually give me literally an object. with JSON objects in it, an array with objects in it. I will console.log jdata. Save it. And let's see what I get out here when I reload the page. There's a promise, there's a reference error, jdata. I can see it here. I call it AJData. So I just do AJData. You can see the result is an array with position, with indexes, and each index contains actually a JSON object. Now that I have that done, I can actually loop through the objects, and I want to do this with a for loop, the all nice for loop. I'm going to start I.0. I'm going to go until I is less than the array with JSON data.length. So we loop through all the elements, and I want to increase I by 1. I will console.log each of the elements just to make sure that this is running fine. So I will say console.log AJData position of I. Save it, reload, and then I get each individual object here in the console. That's fine so far. So what I need to do now is, once I have the loop, I need to populate these users with each of the elements. I will keep it really simple. I could create a whole new function that will get this code, and then I will share the function between this part of the code and the part of the code that I need here. But I'd rather just copy all these again. So I just copy it and paste it. I will give some spaces so you can see what I just copy and pasted. I will need to create a variable for the div for the user, which is the blueprint. The blueprint already contains this ID, the name. I will need to replace it with the name, with the last name, and then I will inject it inside the SUsers. Here we have to make a few changes. I can see this. This is fine because I make a copy of the blueprint. Then I will replace the ID with JData ID. Let me extract each of these elements in a variable. Let me call it let JUser equals AJData position of I. So actually here we will have the individual user. Maybe this has an ID of 1, an ID of 2, an ID of 3 inside the loop. This JUser will be JUser.id. I will replace the name with JUser.name. I will replace the last name with JUser.lastname. And I'm getting those keys by looking at the console here. I have the name, I have the last name, I have the ID. JUser ID, that element, the name and the last name. And then I will insert it inside the div. Save it, reload. I get all the users. I will add a new user. I will call it final test. I will click enter. Final test is there. I reload. And then final test is there, but that's because I have not ordered the results from the database. You know what, guys? Let's do that. Let's go to the API, get users, and over here I will say select all from users, and let me order by the name of the users. Let's see what we get there. Reload, all days. Weird ordering actually. Let's do ascending. So we get A, Y, F, C, A. Sure, that's working fine, I guess. Descending. Yes, that's a little bit better. Capitalize and lowercase, they're a little bit different. They have different orders, but that's what I want. Let's say that's fine. Let me delete now everything. I will say delete from users. I will run this command. the selected query only. I reload the page. This AB is actually coming from here. That was my original blueprint. I don't need it anymore, so I delete it. Reload, there's nothing. A, B, at, reload, C, D, hit enter, reload, E, F, at the user, reload. That's it, guys. Please, one more time, subscribe, like it, get notifications. I will build in the coming days the update user and the delete user. Thank you so much for being with me.